Howdy, welcome to Grandma's Wealth Wisdom, and please join me in welcoming our guest today, Shawna. She is the hostess of the Consensual Sales podcast, and when I heard her story, I just knew we had to have her on Grandma's Wealth Wisdom because I think she's got some great things to share with our people. So welcome, Shawna.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. That was such a nice introduction.
Well, and if people are curious, we have matching headphones because we've got a great podcast producer that we both share, and that's how we met. So full disclosure there, we are connected that way as well.
I actually love and prefer the headphones, like the big sort of ones over the teeny buds, and like they're always falling out, and I would lose the whatever you call them, the fancy ones.
Yeah. And when you have kids that are making lots of noise, this also cancels out all their noise too.
Totally.
For sure. Well, okay. I know your story, but obviously our audience does. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today. Give us the highlights of what brought you to be talking about consensual sales.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated from the University of Minnesota back in 2008. So right before the economy tanked. And at that time, there were, all the messages at the time I was receiving was do what you love, do what you love. And I was like, well, I love families. I'll study families. So I got a degree in family social science and just couldn't find a job anywhere after that. With the combination of this degree and the economy. So over the course of a couple of years, I eventually landed a job in the tissue donation industry where I was approaching families immediately after their loved ones had died to consider donation. And most people think of donation and it's like, oh, like your kidney and your lungs, like, wow, like that's such a great gift. And it is. But what I was actually asking for was even sort of like next level weird, which was like eyeball donation. So like for cornea transplants and whole eyes for like research purposes. And so I did that for a year and I loved that job, right? So I was really facilitating that conversation with somebody where they're vulnerable while still giving them the ability to come to a decision that they wanted and like the whole family kind of agreed on. And like 5 kids, 2 cross-country moves. I just had to I couldn't do that anymore. I had I couldn't work in the office anymore, but I had some cleaning experience. So I started dabbling in marketing and I understood those concepts. So over the course of a couple years, I just started having friends casually ask me like, hey, Shawna, I've got these proposals out and I don't know how to get paid on them. I don't know how to follow up without being desperate. Like, I don't know how to fill a pipeline, right? I don't know when my next client's going to come from. So I just started casually helping my friends. And then one thing led to another. And I learned really quickly that it was really the same sort of skill set of helping people navigate a decision rather than feeling like you've got to force them into a corner. So yeah, that's kind of what you see today. And that's consensual sales came out of that.
Yeah. I imagine if someone was going to learn sales, they wouldn't first think of helping families make the choice of tissue donation. Sure. But when you think about it, that's a really tough conversation to have that's full of emotion as they're grieving. And there's probably a lot that you learned being thrown into that. Sure. How much training did they give you? How much did you have to learn on your own? I imagine studying people and social sciences, you knew a lot coming into it as well.
That's great that you asked that. You go through the typical orientation, but where the real practice came from was hitting record and playing it back. And so we did a lot of that, right? So you're understanding cadence, you're understanding tonality. And then what would happen is it's basically like a call center, right? Like where you are sitting there, the phone rings, the nurse is like, hey, we're calling in this death. Here's the contact information for the family, whatever, right? But you're in this office with 6 other coworkers who are listening in, and everybody's in the room, all quiet when you're on the phone. And so they would hear you, right? And so you get off the phone and then they would say, Shawna, say this next time, try this. Here's one way that you could do this. And so everybody was incredibly supportive. And that's kind of how you want to learn sales as well, which is on the job, on the fly. But in an environment where people are helping you, because the conversations can go 100 different ways. And to act like it's if you say this, then this will happen, then this, it's so much more dynamic than that. So getting that live feedback was so important. And then being able to hear, right? So then I could hear, oh, okay, like, Jean says it this way, or Whitney says things that way. And so you could pick up little stuff. So when you would get into a call, you could really speak in a way that was true to you.
Yeah. And was this, how did you, so part of how I kind of titled today is advice for women who need to sell. So when you think about you, I think you're a woman, like when you bring your femininity into this, how did that help you with these kinds of conversations?
Totally. I think that women on their own are already very natural salespeople. We just might not even think of it or think of it as selling, right? So I'd like to share this example of my daughter one day who got off the bus and didn't come home, right? I was like kind of waiting. I got 4 other kids and like, oh, she's walking. She's got to be close, And she's not coming home. And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm not worried, right? Like I'm not worried. But
I would be worried.
I'm like, where is she? So I call around, I call the school, and the school's like, no, she got on the bus. I thought, okay, well, that's weird. So I drive to her friend's house where she often goes, right near where the bus stop is. And she's not there. And I call my husband and I'm like, hey, I don't want you to worry, but like, she's not here. We're going to have to call the police, like whatever. So we get home. The police are on their way. My husband's home from work. And all of a sudden, Jane pulls in with one of the parents of the house that I had just been at. And they were like apparently they were like in the back and they didn't hear us. So she comes in and I'm thinking, well, she comes in and my husband was like, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? Like, you got to come home right away. And she kept saying that she told me she was going to her friends. And I was like, that is not true. I know that's not true. She never told me that. But I know that in sales, that if you constantly point out how wrong someone is, you're never going to uncover the truth. Mm-hmm. Right. And so when he laughed and everybody laughed and it's just the 2 of us, I went up to her and I didn't like confront her, but I basically said what I already knew to be true was that it was obvious she wanted to go to her friend's house. That was the thing that we both agreed on. Right. So I said, hey, Jane, you really wanted to go to your friend's house, huh? Oh, she went and starts crying. And she's like, the mom was sleeping. And like, we were just in the back and we would have called you. And like, all of it comes out. Right. And when we think about sales, that's really what we're trying to do is we're just trying to have a really honest, transparent conversation. It's like when you are struggling with sales, it's almost like you're missing the emotional connection that makes understanding possible. And women, we are so good at this. We are so good at this. And so this is just one way that women already have this natural skill set. Plus, I mean, like if we want something, like we kind of know how to get it. So I could talk all day about the natural skill set that women have, but I do think that there is something to be said about the way that we can approach relationships and having this like honest, transparent conversation because we can read between the lines and kind of tease out what people are and are not saying. And that's your job, right? It's like, It's not always about what people say. It's also what they're not saying. And you can kind of gauge and temper check those things along the way, which is just so important when you're doing the sales thing.
Yeah. And to tie this back to money, I think that honest conversation, that if we can have that around money, it just improves like our trajectory. It improves, any planning that we do, any actions that we take. If we're able to get really honest and authentic about it, that can just do wonders. Yeah. Anything you'd say about how what you're talking about with sales relates to wealth or money?
Yeah. If it's one thing to like be able to make sales, right? And it's another thing entirely to like save that money or multiply that money. And so if you're one thing that I'm coming into contact with is people are often like thinking that more sales will always fix their problems. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this actually just happened. I have a really great client who has like an Etsy shop and she wants more sales and she's increasing and she's growing. Well, hey, look, she wants more sales. I'm like, okay, well, what actually is your profit margin, right? Like she didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so these are like common, like just because you might have money in the bank and see yourself growing doesn't necessarily always mean that you have more money. And that's because that sales is both offense and defense.
Yep. 100% agree that sometimes it's more sales, more problems. And then you have to know your business model and have a plan for what you do with the profit that you have, all that kind of thing. Tell me more about what you mean by offense and defense when it comes to sales.
Yeah. So actually, I did not come up with this. My good friend Megan Dolly had actually mentioned it to me once. And it's this idea that we think that we can outsell our problems, right? If we just get like every solution to our problems is just more sales, without ever really stopping and check and say like, are my numbers right? Like, does this make sense? Like, what's my profit margin? Do I really need to be working this hard? Or can I readjust some of my offers or think about things differently? Like, what don't I know? And when you can do that, I mean, then you can really start playing on the offense rather than just constantly reacting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you want to have some sales, but you want to make sure that they're actually profitable sales. And you play this like you improve your total sales, you improve your profitability, you improve your sales, and you kind of go back and forth. It's not just focusing on one.
Well, and this comes up when people are asking, like, how much should I charge? This question is like hands down, the constant question that I get is like, how much should I charge for this? Well, like, if I just pick a number, I'm like picking one out of thin air, and that's not going to do anything for both of us. Like, we have to consider how much you charge. Like, there's so many things to consider, starting with like, what are your bills this month? Like, how much does it cost to run your business? It's like, I don't know, like, you tell me, like, how much do you need to cover? Then how much more do you need to charge for like, not to like show up for the work so you don't feel like you want to die. Plus, then if you got to pay for a babysitter and then your taxes, or like, then maybe there's extra where you want to grow. Maybe you want to go to a conference or buy a particular program. You got to put in some margin for that growth.
Yep.
It's a lot to think about. So it's not just like, I can't tell you necessarily how much to charge, but it's like, we got to think about what are we playing with?
Do you find that a lot of women undercharge? Or overcharge?
Yeah. I mean, what's been your experience with that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I'm always accused of undercharging, particularly by my husband. He's like, we need to, so I'm one of those kind of people that totally love to underpromise and then overdeliver. Sure. But sometimes I charge for the underpromise, and even under that rather than the over delivery part. And I don't know if that's something that is because I'm a woman and I'm thinking about others too much, or something like that. I don't know. What do you find for yourself? Do you find that you under or overcharge?
Yeah, I think that what comes up for a lot of people is, in my experience, is that when you start charging, all of a sudden it feels like a much greater responsibility, right? Now I have to say, if I charge you $3,000 for this website copy, right? All of a sudden it's like, it better be so good, right? So it's kind of like so this goes back, I'm just mirroring what you had just said, is that you all of a sudden have this extra responsibility of like, man, am I really going to be as good as I say? Am I going to be able to get this done? And that's honest. Those are honest questions. So if that's coming up, I'd just say then have that honest question, have that honest conversation with your person, right? Like, what do you expect? How will you know that this will be great? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the sales process, is setting the expectation so that the amount that is agreed on to sell is the same as the deliverable, right? And that both parties feel good about that.
Absolutely. I also would think that there's also this level of like, more money is more responsibility, right? So now all of a sudden maybe you got to pay more taxes, or maybe you're going to have to like switch that checking over to a business account, right? So all of a sudden it could just start feeling like a more and more daunting task, rather than like, yeah, that's just something I do on the side, like for extra cash. So it's this mind frame of like, if you're happy, like doing this like hobby-esque status of a business, or if you really want this to be something that's profitable and wealthy and leave something for your family, then that's a totally different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you've gone from helping friends, kind of dabbling, to making this your business. What has that been like for you?
Oh my gosh. What has it been like for me? Well, what I did is I then started just picking up projects, right, where I was helping other people sell. So I've sold anywhere from, cold calling to emails to picking up the phone to closing deals as high, tens of thousands of dollars. And so I've really kind of honed in on that skill, and it's naturally evolved as I've gotten better, and as like I've sort of figured out like what are the nuances that I'm really going to be able to help people in. And so it's absolutely been an evolution. And this is something that I think is important for most people to understand, is that whatever you're trying to accomplish in your business, like the best thing that you can do is like tinker along the process. Like it's going to constantly be changing the more and more that you are refining your message. We think that, well, this is something that you're going through too, I would suspect, is that we sometimes think that our messaging is one and done, but it's not. Like it's always like you're always tinkering with it. You're always sort of tweaking it. It's just like never quite, like it's just like never quite right, or you're never quite satisfied with the way that it is.
Yeah. Or like if we're committed to a growth mindset and we want to always be growing, then our how we talk about what we do and what we do should be growing the same way.
Totally.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing these words of wisdom with our audience. I want to for sure let people know where to go if they want to connect with you. Before we do that, anything else you wanted to share today?
Oh man. Well, what do you want women to know about money?
Yeah,
Maybe that's kind of a loaded question, but I'd love to get your opinion on like, what is it that you really want women to know about money?
Yeah. So I've been, lots of people say they want financial independence or financial freedom. And typically the definition of that is you get this big pile of money and you can just live off the passive income of it and it supports all your needs. And so you don't have to work anymore. You can just do whatever you feel like doing, whatever your passion is. And I love that idea. But I wonder, for me, like I went on this entrepreneurial path when I was 24, right? Shortly before my 25th birthday. I left my job. I figured out how to make a business and do these things. And so in some ways I was retired, right? I wasn't working in a cubicle anymore. But the goal for me was never to make a big pile of money. The goal for me was to give my gift to the world, right? And money wasn't something I thought about. And yet, then I found myself on the edge of poverty, right? And I needed to say, okay, maybe money is kind of important. But I still have that seed inside of me that wants to define financial independence as not being dependent on money.
Sure.
So having a community, right, that I feel loved and cared for. And I knew if I lost all the money I had, they would help take care of me, right? And I would do the same for them, right? That I have all my basic needs met, which those start with feeling safe and secure, right? Sure. And that can be a house, right? But it can also be having loved ones and knowing that they love me and I love them, right? And so I want this like broader perspective that financial independence isn't really about money at all. And you don't need to have this big pile of money, but you do need a big pile of friends and family and community, which is so lacking for a lot of people. It's just socials, like the Facebook and stuff, but it could be so much more than that if we seek it out and build it. So from your opinion, do you think that the people who have more money like actually feel less secure? Yeah, so I've heard people philosophize about that for sure, because I know plenty of people who don't have two nickels to rub together, and yet they have rich, very fulfilling lives, not a care in the world, because they feel loved and cared for, and they're part of an awesome community. Whereas particularly people, that maybe live in the suburbs, they drive out their garage and go, to work, and they come back and they don't really know their neighbors and they feel disconnected. That definitely leaves I think a feeling of insecurity that way, because you just don't have that solid foundation of relationships.
I was listening to this podcast once and this guy like super rich, like investor, like has millions and billions of dollars. And he was talking about like the more money that he's making, like it's just more worries. Like, do I have enough to cover like my kids? And okay, now do I have enough to cover like my grandkids? Okay, do I have enough to cover to like all this stuff, like the community investments that he was making? And like it just became this bigger and bigger thing. And so it's like speaking to that point is like, yes, we want like that financial stability, but like, are you really financially free? Even being financially free doesn't always equate more money. And I love that emphasis you're making.
Yeah. And particularly there's been some like, movies made about certain artists who made it big and made a ton of money, and yet they felt really lonely. The one about, we just recently watched it recently. Brandon's totally watching. He could probably share in the comments. But
Brandon.
I'm horrible at names of movies. But I think like how lonely people feel when they make a lot of money, particularly as an artist, because then anybody that's creative, we've probably felt this tension between you create because you love to create. But then once you start making money, you feel like a sellout. You're not sure if you're creating for the right reasons. There's a lot of doubt that comes there. And so that's also maybe part of it too, is being able to be artisanal, to be artists, to create something unique and still make money from it, but not feel like we're selling out. And I'd love to explore more of that too.
Sweet. Good for you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, this is a great conversation. Are we wrapping up here?
Yeah, I want to let people know. So I'm putting the name of the podcast, Consensual Sales. Find it on all of your awesome podcast places. And then if you want to check out the website, heyshawnaMay.com. We've also linked that below this video, so you can just click instead of typing it in. Of course, if you Google Shawna May or Shawna Beckman, you'll be able to find it as well.
Awesome.
And then one final reminder from the Grandma's Wealth Wisdom station to subscribe, hit the bell if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, like and follow our page for future interviews and awesomeness to help you break through to a bright, smart, stable financial future.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.